to chair this first plenary session, Plenary F, on different countries' approaches to fostering research integrity, we are pleased to call forth Sonia Vasconcelos from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro.
Morning, everyone. I think everybody has recharged batteries for today's talks. We had a very good night yesterday, so I think everybody now is relaxed. And then for our plenary, which is entitled Different Countries' Approaches to Fostering Research Integrity, we will have a keynote address by Professor Paulo Beirão, which is Director of Science, Technology, and Innovation for Minas Gerais Foundation for Research Support. And his keynote address will focus on threat to research integrity, publish whatever or perish. Please come. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for being here after that evening, wonderful evening. That I hope you had a nice sleep. I decided to speak on a broader theme, and I must say that I'm speaking not on behalf of the agency I'm working with now, FAPEMIG. I'm speaking on behalf of myself, but using the experience that I have had as researcher, which I still am, member of the directory board of the National Research Council, the Brazilian National Research Council, as director of FAPEMIG, and also as a former member of the steering committee of the Global Research Council. So I have some experience, but I'm not speaking on behalf of any of those agencies. Let me ask first, how reproducible are the published scientific data? One can see that there is a growing concern about reproducibility of research results nowadays. I'll mention that this problem is very much highlighted on respect to the preclinical experiments, because, as mentioned yesterday by Elizabeth, this is an area of much social interest, and of course it may involve human living lives. And of course, there is also much interest from the pharmaceutical industry. There is one publication in which, this is one of many publications, in which the pharmaceutical company tries to reproduce published data. And in this study, only 20 to 25% of the relevant data could be really reproduced by an important pharmaceutical company. This has been published in Nature in 2011. The evidence exists that similar phenomena also occur in other areas, but this is very much highlighted by the reasons I have just mentioned. Of course, the fact that it's not being reproduced does not mean that there is a wrongdoing. There are other reasons for that, and I'll briefly discuss. But before that, who should we trust more? The industry that is checking the published results or the academia? Of course, there are different and contradictory biases between those two studies. For academia, having more rigor, may lead to delayed publication or even no publication, because most of the journals, as we know, don't publish negative results. On the other hand, for the industry, more rigor may mean avoidance of waste of money. So these are different perspectives. Of course, we have to remind that after having a product, the biases change. The industry tends to overlook adverse effects and overestimate positive effects. So there is no bad guy and good guy there. one could ask, is there such a thing as excessive rigor? I would say yes, in a sense that we may be discarding, because it was not reproduced, we may be discarding important information. I'll give an example very soon. But let's consider the possible causes of failure to reproduce published data. Of course, we have the problem of integrity, fabrication, falsification of data. I'm not going to discuss that because this has been extensively discussed throughout this conference. We have also uncontrolled, unpredictable variability. Just to mention one example, in a few years has been growing evidence of the importance of the intestinal flora for many physiological phenomena, which means that, for example, for many studies in immunology, they probably have to be revisited considering the importance of the intestinal flora. The results may be completely different depending on the constitution of this flora. This is one case of unpredictable variability, because until recently, this was not really controlled and considered important. Other thing is the honest experimental errors or difference in procedures. And now I will give a very emblematic example. In the early 60s, there was a serious dispute among muscle physiologists whether calcium was important for the activity of contractile proteins. Different groups had contradictory and irreconcilable results. A very distinguished Japanese researcher, Setsuro Ebashi, decided to reproduce and try and reproduce in the minimal details all the experiments. And then he realized that depending on the details of the publication, the contractile proteins would depend or not on calcium. And all experiments could be reproduced. As a result, he discovered a new protein, a known protein that he named troponin, that plays a crucial role in the control of contraction. Its presence or absence in the assay depends on the temperature of the purification of actin and determines the need or not of calcium. So it means that sometimes the non-reproducible result may be a clue for finding a new phenomenon. So again, it's not necessarily a negative thing. Going back to the causes of failure to reproduce published data, we have, of course, non-responsible conduct of research. And I'll discuss a little bit some. This has been mentioned in the Singapore statement as one of the breaches of integrity. And I'll quote the item number 3, research methods. Researchers should employ appropriate research methods, base conclusions on critical analysis of the evidence, and report findings and interpretations fully and objectively. So, what are some causes of non-responsible conduct of science that will lead to irreproducible results? Bad practices, lack of experimental rigor, bad interpretation of the data, including bad use of statistics. It has been mentioned yesterday, the importance of sample calculation, but also some people, I think there is a tendency of some people to use different statistical methods and select the one that fits better his wishes or her wishes. There is also a bias toward positive results. I'll give an example, but it has been mentioned in several talks, the problem of selective report. Lack of detailed description of experimental methodology, which was the case I mentioned with Ebashi, and negligence of hasty manuscript elaboration. We have had some cases, even here in Brazil, in which there were errors in the presentation of the paper that were caused by hasty elaboration of the manuscript. I'll give an example that is also emblematic of the bias towards positive results. It's the case of memory of water. I think many of you may remember that. In 1988, a group of researchers claimed that after many sequential dilutions of a solution of antibody, to the point that no single molecule was expected to be present in this solution, this solution would produce the same properties of the original solution. The paper was published in June in Nature with a warning from the editor, John Maddox at that time, stating that the manuscript seemed to contain no flaw, but lacked a reasonable explanation. So it was still published. But in July, a group of experts, which included a magician and also John Maddox himself, they went to the lab of this researcher and saw the execution of the experiments. And the first experiments gave the same results as published. But then they decided to require that the experimenters would not know which flask had the diluted or undiluted antibody. I mean, the blind test. And then the results were random. There was the conclusion, or the results were absolutely against the conclusion. So they published in the next month, in Nature, the final conclusion. And in fact, this type of experiment could not be reproduced. This illustrates very clearly the problem of the bias. There is also an important part played by the publishers, is the negligence on the manuscript assessment. So there is also an experiment that was carried out by Bohannon and was published in Science, in which he sent fake manuscripts. And I'll quote what fake manuscript meant to him: with such grave errors that a competent peer reviewer should easily identify it as a flawed and unpublishable. So he submitted to 304 open access journals. He received within this, the time that he set for the experiment, 255 editorial decisions, and only 98 were rejected, which means about 1/3. 2/3 were accepted. And many of them with no evidence of being really reviewed. Although not investigated, it's expected that this editorial negligence is not restricted to open access journals. But it's important to notice that the enormous growth of the number of this type of publication is a matter of concern. It's fair to conclude nowadays that anything can be published in a scientific publication if you can afford that. Of course, it's important to mention that this should not be interpreted as a problem with the idea of the open access journal, which I think is a great idea, but we should be very much concerned about those predatory publishers, and the number is increasing. So, how to avoid these problems? How to make scientific publications more reliable? I'll just risk to give some suggestions. First of all, there must be contributions from the publishers, of course. First is they should publish and follow guidelines of quality requirements. Of course, many publish the guidelines, but they don't really obey the guidelines, as has been mentioned in one of the talks. Improve the mechanisms of peer review. As has been also mentioned before, peer review is the worst method of assessment except for all the others. So we have to use it. This is the gold mechanism for assessment. When appropriate, use qualified statisticians for manuscript review. Very often we have some more sophisticated statistics that the normal researcher don't dominate. And so I think it would be important to have, for this type of paper, a specific assessment in addition to the regular evaluation. Reject manuscript with evidence of careless handling, for example, orthography. This is no problem with native English speakers, because all the softwares now have a correction for orthography. I myself used for this presentation. If there is any error, blame it on Microsoft. I use the American spelling. Sorry for the British. But of course, very often we have truncated sentences, very errors in figures, very evident errors in figures. So can you trust something that was written so carelessly on the data that they are presenting? I would not trust. Stimulate publication of relevant data that underlies one's work or support one's reasoning. For example, I think the publishers should stimulate. If I'm basing my reasoning on other people's experiment, I should be stimulated to reproduce their experiment and add to my paper. This is a way of having the so-called reproducing data or reinforcing or negative results being checked and published. Allow contradicting and/or supporting comments on publications or refutation of papers, of course, subject to normal review. The open access strategies offer enormous possibilities. For example, signed reviews and post-publication review. On Monday, I saw a poster, a very nice poster of the British Medical Journal, that they are using that, and I think this may be a trend. It's very important to follow up their experience. And of course, open data. Role of research institutions. Periodically instruct researchers on good practices. Redesign reward system with the emphasis on assessment of quality and reward reproducible research. This, I think, is a crucial point in order to stimulate people to do the best quality research. Recognize signed reviews of manuscripts in the case that there will be, this procedure will be used normally on papers and on internal assessment and promotion. The use good practices records on recruiting processes. It's important to have those type of record as one of the criteria for recruitment. Pre-register clinical trials and have fair, timely, and rigorous mechanisms for handling malpractice allegations. What are possible actions for the funding agencies? In that case, I will quote the Global Research Council. That is a forum of research funding agencies that was created in May 2012, ideally involving all the agencies in the world. In this event, there were 50 countries present. The first topic that was discussed was merit review, which of course is the core business of any funding agency. But it's very emblematic, very significant, the fact that the second topic was research integrity, showing that it's a major issue for the funding agencies. This is the people who have approved the document I'm going to show to you now. In the preamble of this document, there is an important statement, which I quote. While researchers and institutions themselves remain ultimately responsible for undertaking research with integrity, research funding agencies have an obligation to ensure that the research they support is conducted in accordance with the highest standards possible. So what are the roles of the research funding agencies as it is seen from the Global Research Council? There are those items, I'll go to each one. Leadership. Research funding agencies must lead by example in the responsible management of research programs. Research funding agencies should encourage institutions to develop and implement policies and systems to promote integrity in all aspects of the research enterprise. Education. Research funding agencies should promote continual training in research integrity and develop initiatives to educate all researchers and students on the importance of research integrity. Research funding agencies should, within the scope of their mandate, publish policies and procedures to promote research integrity and to address allegations of research misconduct. During any investigation of misconduct, research funding agencies should support a process that values accountability, timeliness, and fairness. Research funding agencies should incorporate integrity in research as a condition for obtaining and maintaining funding by researchers and institutions. And finally, research funding agencies will work cooperatively with partners to support and facilitate research integrity worldwide. That's one of the reasons for the existence of the Global Research Council. when I gave a talk in Montreal, it was a few weeks before the approval of those documents. And there was a pressure on me to leak this, the document, but that would be a serious breach of integrity, so I resisted. But now I'm giving my comments on this document 2 years later. I would like to add something to those statements. I think the funding agency, they may stimulate the existence of workshops and seminars on responsible conduct of research, have transparency and guidelines on publications. CNPq has published a guideline on publications. Peer review improvements, of course, depending on the type of the assessment of one's CV, you may stimulate one or other type of behavior. If the agency will just count papers, there will be a stimulus for this salami publication or publication of any type of result, including results obtained without the proper rigor. Other mechanisms of CV assessment and reward one's effective contribution to science or technology, not just see the number of papers or even publication of papers, but the effective contribution to knowledge. And strengthen open access strategies. I think there is also a role by the scientific societies. The societies should promote activities on research integrity and good practices. Promote training strategies for responsible conduct and best practices with emphasis on the field of knowledge of this society, specific areas that they deal with. Publish guidelines for best practices in their respective fields. Contribute to the identification of predatory publications. This is, I think, is a major importance because they will give a feedback, a contribution for the agencies that very often cannot properly identify this type of predatory publication. Stimulate the verification of published results and report on negative results. And help implement policies on conflicting interests. Finally, just my opinion is that no stakeholder alone can solve this problem. There is a need for a joint effort. And I'm very pleased to see that in this conference, we have several stakeholders present, contributing with their own point of view, their own biases. Everybody has a bias, in order to try and make consensus, in order to preserve the credibility of science, which is the major issue that we are dealing with. Well, I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Beirão. Our next speaker is Francis Cum from the Wellcome Trust Research Program, and the title of his presentation is Enhancing Research Integrity in Africa. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm Francis Kombe from Kenya, and in the next few minutes, I'm going to be talking to you or sharing my personal views about research integrity in Africa. So perhaps before I start, I would want to ask a question if there's anyone in the conference who's had any experience in conducting research in Africa? All right. I was expecting more hands. So I will be talking to you generally, giving a very brief overview of what my thoughts are about research integrity, and then try to put the talk into the context of Africa and discuss a few things about what I think what things are being done towards enhancing research integrity in Africa, and share some of the challenges that I think are on the way. So being a person who has committed quite a bit of my time doing training, I want to take a more constructive view of what research integrity is all about. And therefore, I look at research integrity in terms of one being accountable, because there's a lot of public funds that is committed in research, and therefore one has to be prepared to be accountable. I'm looking at integrity in terms of being transparent, being able to lay everything in black and white, and being able to be ready for people to criticize what you have done, but also being able to take responsibility for what you are doing, because research involves some level of potential risk, and therefore whether they are positive or negative findings from your research, you ought to be able to take responsibility for what you are doing. And therefore, I think that way of looking at research integrity basically reflects very well with some of the principles that are in the Singapore Statement. So basically, when we talk about research integrity, it's very uncommon in Africa. It's very common to find people talking about research ethics as opposed to research integrity. And this is also, in my view, compounded by the fact that in the literature, research integrity in Africa basically doesn't exist. If you go to major search engines like PubMed, you search for research integrity in Africa, basically nothing pops up. So there's nothing about research integrity in Africa, and basically which shows that there's even little evidence or no evidence of research misconduct in Africa. So I wonder whether this implies that there's no research misconduct in Africa. And if I were to ask that question, I would probably say no. Do you think there's research misconduct in Africa? Do you think? Yes. But so why is it not reflected? Why is it not published like the way that we see a lot of, information being published from the US, for example? So there are many issues about research integrity in Africa, but basically nobody has come up to share these issues. There are no structures, there are no systems in place to be able to investigate these issues and bring them to the limelight. So for those who have had some experience in conducting research in Africa, probably will find this quite familiar. And so what I am trying to say in this slide is basically to say, when you think about doing research in Africa, there are more contextual issues that you have to think about. So it's not just about doing research in the right way, it's also about the process. It's not just about research integrity per se, but it's also looking at the process of how you conduct your research. So for example, Africa comes from the background of having gone through quite a bit of social and economical exploitation. And these experiences have made quite a lot of people in Africa having quite a bit of some mistrust in terms of trusting scientists, for example. So it's not uncommon, for example, to be talking to someone, even some of the quite educated people, and they talk about research in terms of scientists or researchers injecting some live viruses in human beings to investigate how those viruses develop over time. So there's a lot of misconception and fear about research. Fear for the unknown, but also the potential for exploitation, because many people in Africa are quite illiterate about research. Research is seen as something very alien. Not so many people have experience about research, and even those who participate in research rarely understand that they're being involved in research. And therefore, it is this level of illiteracy, this level of mistrust that you also have to put into consideration even as you think about doing research that conforms to integrity or some level of integrity. So it is important as you think about integrity in Africa, you think about how to build trust with the different people who are involved in research. There's also the issue of principles that are boardroom principles and how these principles are applied on the ground. So the context from which most of the principles are developed, when you try to apply them on the ground, sometimes you totally find a different scenario altogether, and these principles might not be able to apply on the ground. So take, for instance, many researchers who work in Africa may not be linguistically competent to, for example, go to the community and talk to people or collect even, samples, because you have to consent people before you collect these samples. And therefore, what normally happens in Africa, many scientists will employ, local people to work at the front line. And many times, these frontline staff have very limited education, 12 years of education, for example. They have just left secondary school. They have no even undergraduate education. They are employed with a job description of your job will be to recruit this number, recruit participants. Your job will be to take samples. Your job will be to conduct this number of interviews. So when these people are on the ground, the way they do the things, the way they collect this information might totally be different from the perspective of the researcher. Remember, when this researcher is submitting a proposal, the IRB will be asking for, have you gone through some training? It is the researcher who will give a certificate, right? But the people who work on the ground are totally different. They have no training, okay? So it is being able to appreciate the realities on the ground and the kind of ethical dilemmas that might arise as a result of using these different people. But also, it's a fact that Africa it basically relies on external support to do research. And this external support comes with some conditions. So these conditions, sometimes there's quite a very wide, power distance or power imbalance in terms of what the funding agency wants and what you are able to negotiate with your funder in terms of what needs to take place on the ground. Just before I came here, I was very disappointed when one of the PIs asked me to organize training for a group of staff that she was employing to work in her study. And just one day before this training was to commence, she came to me. She actually first wrote an email and said, I'm sorry, we can't go on with the training. And I had planned everything all set for the training, and then she came and said, the study has been canceled. And I was like, what? One day before we do the training? She said, yeah, and she was really, really, heartbroken. She was like, the study has been canceled because it was a multi-center study. We were basically competing for numbers, and the two sides got the numbers, so we don't have to do the study. So you can imagine that type of tension, and on the ground, you have to do things right. If you are fighting for numbers, because that is the design of the study, what powers do you have as the PI to be able to do that, to do things right on the ground? So there are these dynamics that we always have to appreciate when we do research in Africa. Allow me to present this. This is a project. It was done by CORED, and the aim of this project was to map out mapping of Africa capacity for research. Basically, it shows the amount or the level of systems or ethical review committees in Africa. And a total of 165 research ethics committees were operating by the time this project was being done from 37 African countries. And that, you can say, it's really, really nice, okay? But if you read about this project, you quickly realize that actually, out of the 165 RECs, less than 10% had any training, the committees had any training about ethics, or they didn't even have any guidelines that guided them to conduct their work. And if you ask me why, my guess would be this happened because there was a lot of pressure from the funding agencies that for you to be funded, you need to have a local committee to approve research. So basically, we are saying there's limited or even non-existent governance or regulatory systems in Africa. It's still very evolving, and there's lack of training and capacity for these institutions, okay? And we have, as we think about research integrity in Africa, we have to look at research integrity holistically and not just have a narrow view of research integrity. So what are we doing towards enhancing research integrity? In 2011, I was part of a group that attended training in Sareti. Sareti is a South African research ethics training initiative in South Africa, and we were doing a module in professional ethics. Part of that module was also to discuss about research integrity. And I was dismayed, and many of my colleagues were dismayed by the fact that there was absolutely nothing that was happening about research integrity in Africa. And based on those experiences, we came down and we thought, wow, why don't we just begin to talk about research integrity in Africa? And that is how we came about developing this paper, which was basically to come down, 12 of those students coming from 9 different countries coming together to begin to share different experiences about research integrity in Africa. But over and above that, the data that was collected from a personal level, I know for a fact the data that was collected from the MAC survey that was done by CORED, this has been also put in the research ethics web. And I find this important because this is a web where countries can log in and access the data about regulatory systems, policies and things that are happening in their country. But over and above that, you can also view what is happening in different countries with regards to governance and practices, national priorities and in research, and many other dimensions that you can think about. And this somehow encourages and provides kind of mentorship. Just looking at what another country has done can provoke you and think, wow, why don't we do things like how country X is doing? So this is a resource that begins to provoke some kind of thoughts about research integrity in Africa. Although this is not specifically about research integrity, it's about ethics, but I find it as a very positive move towards that. CORED has also established a platform from the understanding that many research ethics committees basically do not have training. They have tried to develop a platform, which is basically an administration tool that brings together research information and management, a management software that aims to provide research ethics committee, governments, researchers, and regulatory institutions with a web-based platform that can be used to monitor, evaluate, and communicate about some of these experiences. It includes facilities to train research ethics committee members and regulatory officers. It provides a platform to interact among research ethics committees within institutions, but also across institutions. So far, it has a usage of 3,739 from 8 different African countries, and 23 institutions have subscribed. So these are efforts towards standardizing what is happening across Africa. But what are the challenges? We know for sure Africa still relies a lot on external funding. And as I said, this external funding comes with conditions, okay? Some of these conditions are not providing the conducive environment for research integrity. But over and above that, we lack input from Africa. There's absolutely no contribution from Africa with regards to enhancing research integrity. We lack political goodwill from our national governments, and basically that's a big challenge because we need support, we need national and local structures within to be able to support research integrity. And so what do we think can be done? Or what do I think can be done? Those are my personal views. So basically I'm saying it's really important to develop an enabling environment for research integrity. This involves investing in development of governance and regulatory policies and structures at both local and national levels to be able to review, monitor, and deal with some of these undesirable research practices fairly and transparently. It is important to invest in technological and financial resources to empower local scientists, students, and communities in responsible conduct of research. And I'm using the word empower because I do not believe in structures that are like policing scientists. I believe in developing a moral intuition in scientists to be able to know what is good and what is bad and avoid doing what is bad. And that's very important. It is important to build capacity. Strong mentorship, it really dismays me when I interact with undergraduate students from some of our universities. And what they do is basically when they're asked to do a research project, you can find 10 different students basically copying and pasting the same project. So we need to mentor them right from the early age to nurture these positive values about research integrity. We need to train them in ethics and responsible conduct of research using pedagogies that develop moral intuitions so that they are able to be empowered to know what right things to do with regards to research integrity. We need effective support supervision, and we need collaboration, north to south technological transfer that strengthens local capacity in addressing some of the integrity issues that I have talked about, especially in developing strong regulatory systems that are able to monitor, document, and report some of these issues that we have been talking about. It's important to establish and engage equitably in transitional partnerships, because I have identified this as one of the potential challenges with regards to research integrity. It's important to respect local and regulatory governance systems, but also to foster transparency, accountability, and responsible conduct of research. It is important to build local, regional networks that foster responsible conduct of research in Africa. This is important in especially beginning to harmonize some of the steps towards strengthening research integrity in Africa. We need to work together. All right, so in conclusion, we have seen that there's lack of regulatory systems in Africa. That's for a fact. The process of setting up policies, both at national level, is non-existent. At institutional level, it's very slow and is beginning to evolve. It's very important at this level for Africa to begin extensive dialogue with key stakeholders, because if we have to win the war towards encouraging or enhancing research integrity in Africa, it cannot be won by one person. It cannot be won by one stakeholder. We have to develop mutual trust, understanding, and develop reliable and sustainable partnerships that are able to address some of the misconceptions that I've talked about, but also begin to build these structures that enhance research integrity in Africa. Thank you very much, and I would like to acknowledge all the people that you can see for their support, and especially the organizing committee of this conference for facilitating my coming here and presenting to you. It's a great privilege to me. Thank you very much.
So our next speaker, it is Professor Makoto Asashima from Japan Society for the Promotion of Science. And his talk will focus on research integrity in its process in universities and institutes in Japan.
So thank you very much. I'm very honored to talk our recent Japanese situation about research integrity. First, I want to talk about the research integrity and its possible process of university and institution in Japan. Content from the one is also, sorry. Current research integrity in Japan and the challenges, research environment, and changes in the research environment, social drugs, prescription to be the implementation. Green Book is resolve these issues. Conclusion towards the ideas of the research integrity common in the world. So I want to talk about recently our status. So current the research integrity and its challenges. So as you know, we made the Singapore statement 2010. And after that, in Japan, there was a big misconduct of Tohoku universities. Sorry. And after that, we discussed so strongly, then SCJ, Science Council of Japan, revised Code of Conduct, 2012. Then, there was about 2 years ago, there was a Montreal Statement. After that, as Professor mentioned before, GRC, Global Research Council, Berlin Statement, 2 years ago. In this point, till this year is the 5th. However, in this GRC, Global Research Council, make a statement. It is necessary to make an international textbook. So that is one of the case. We try to make the textbook. Then, however, there was also the Diopan incident 2 years ago, and next is so at that time, MEX is Ministry of Education of Science and Technology, Sports and Sciences. Guideline, make the guideline. After that, there was also big event, was an accident in staff cell research misconduct. That was a very, very argument in Japan. So, our Science Council and JSPS, JSPS published and make the book, the research integrity this year. First time we made it in Japanese. Now we can make here the green book. This is a English version. So this book is very honorable to other countries. In last week, we had the Global Research Council in Japan, co-organized with South Africa. At that time, 60 countries, funding agency attended this meeting. At that time, we have the before last year, there was 2 topics. One is how to make the open access. Second is science integrity. So this year, breakthrough of science, how to make. Another point is building capacity for education. Education is important. How do you make such an education for research integrity? So we have tried to do such a things. So this is, as mentioned before, the Singapore statement. So our community or the organization make Singapore statement. At that time, principle is honesty, accountability, professional competencies, and fairness, and good stewardship. These are the content of the Singapore statement. After that, We can also make the Montreal Statement of Research Integrity. Responsibility of the individuals and industrial partners in cross-boundary research collaborations. We have already made the statement, Singapore Statement, Montreal Statement, and I don't know in Rio we can make the statement or not. However, though we have made the Jesus statement in ourselves, but the misconduct is not decreased at the moment. By the Nature paper said the misconduct is more increased. Why? This is our duty to avoid the misconduct. So this is a Global Research Council, and at that time, so here we can see the statement of principle of research integrity, preamble, principles, education. So in the Global Research Council, we said education is important. But how do you make the education? So at that time, we promised for 3 years ago to make a textbook. However, no country cannot make such a textbook. However, in our JSPS, made a textbook. And another situation is a revised version of Code of Conduct for the scientists. From the scientists, revised in Japanese Science Council of Japan. Responsibility of science, research integrity, science in society, legal conference. And so, the continue the as we can say FFP and education and legal agreement and dual use. Dual use is also the very important issue at the moment, because last year some scientists make the dangerous virus, and Nature Science stopped to continue their work. After hard discussion, they have published. Anyway, at the moment, dual use is important, authorship and so on. So, governance of research integrity in Japan makes it a cabinet, and guideline for research response of research integrity in research supported by competitive funding. In Japan, many the funding is now the competitive. So, especially for the young generation, it is very, very hard work to get their own fund. However, how do we make to the correct research or without misconduct? So we can write down in the standpoint of researchers. And next also they said more strongly that rule. And at that time, for example, background here, a little bit small one, and basic direction of the reviewers. So, research environment, I can show you. At that time, many Japanese people do not believe the scientists. So I was nominated and I made the interview to the NHK. NHK is the biggest national broadcasting. That is very effective. At that time, I talked about the NHK has a broadcasting and great appearance on their show. Today's close up to big, deep, and current news background. So this means why I must talk about in the big broadcasting. So that means many people focus to the scientist or strategy and to the status of funding agency. So I thought so carefully, science is principle, curious driven. Another side, science is a mission oriented. These are very important to the collaboration. So I said at the moment, so the research embedded at the moment, and bottom up, mission oriented. So this is a good, we must circulation. And different approaches, but, and ideas of research integrity are common in the world, not only in Japan, but also in the world. Presently, in Japan, they come to from foreign countries, over 200 countries come to Japan, including the postdoc, PI, and so on. And depend on the countries. Research integrity rules are different. So I hope in the near future, minimum the research integrity must be shown, and we must build up to tight connection between all the countries. So changes of the research social trend, result of scientific research for the growth of society, and promote science, technology, and national policy, statement of principles of founding or scientific background, breakthrough. This is a comment of the GRC in last week, just week. So that means I hope we must discussion about not all, of course, the most important things. All this World Congress Research Integrity as a professional scientists or people or organization. However, we must more close contact with a funding agency. And phenomenal growth of the scientific integrity, like a shadow of science. For example, genome editing is now a little bit, some people say it's good. The other said it's very, very dangerous. How do we think about such a thing, genome editing? So, basic concept, we are across the age and countries, and update regulation of the knowledge, elongate the worldwide collaboration research, and mobilization of increasing the number of the part-time employer. This is also very difficult. In Japan, for a long time, if one can get the job, that was permanent. However, now the employer time is limited. Young generation want to get the position, and there's a high competition, not only in Japan, but also in the world. In GRC, we discuss about such a thing. How do you encourage for the young generation and fostering the next generations? And prescription of the implementation, change of landscape of the science of society, and not always corresponding well, and insufficient education, lack of the truth to science, lack of the information. So we have made this book. This book is principle, not only the rule book, but the how to make the science. Yeah. And finally, so we can make this strategy. And here, JSPS complicated the functional knowledge that researchers must know in implementing the research. So we call this research integrity book is Green Book. So Green Book is one of the sample to resolve this issue. And in May this year, we have made in Japanese words. However, we can now, this is a textbook of Green Book. If you want to see our colleagues bring here the textbook and pamphlet. And Green Book is here. This title is a little different, not the directly research integrity. However, for the sound development of science, the attitude of curious scientists. Yeah, this is made by, is now open, new one. So that is the content of this book. What is the research integrity activity? Second part is planning of research. Third is conducting the research. Fourth is conducting research. Yeah. So for a long time, we have discussed about in this World Congress of Research Integrity, ideal the conduct bad conduct, misconduct, FFP. However, already remain this gray zone. How do you treat it? This is a gray zone. Host presenting the research result, authorship, and improper authorship. And presuming the research result, copyright, and so on, and how to conduct of the joint research collaboration. And six is appreciation of the use of the research found, and contribution of quality improvement of the scientific research. And so finally, we say for the progress of society. So Green Book, this is first published in May, and at the moment, we can make in English version. Last year, I show all the countries' funding agency this book. They admire this textbook because this is not the rule book, but how do you make the research? The science must, what is the most important things for the scientist and PI? So from this year, our Japanese government decided we must learn before apply of the grant. They must sign up. Not only Japanese, but also when they come to Japan, they must learn this one. So we made now the e-learning, and e-learning is so new. So conducting this is the progress of the present security for all scientists scheduled at the moment. And at the end of this year, we say show you this e-learning. 3 set is very important to the education for the postdoc, graduate student, and real scientists or PI. All the Japanese scientists must be learned such a research integrity. So conclusion, JSPS efforts in enhancing the research recognition of research integrity common in the world based on mutual task, truth. Yeah. In Japan, we can make such a things. Now we have already started to other countries, for example, other partners. We have already made a seminar with NSF, USA. And this year, the FDA in Germany, and near very future, we can make CNSR in France, and so many countries. We can make the seminar each others, and we discuss about which is the best to make the practice. Towards the ideas of research integrity among the world. I hope so. So our textbook spread all over the world. Of course, this is one of the case or sample. Depends on the countries, rule is different. So, however, I hope one of the base of this is the textbook. Oh, thank you very much for your attention.